Luther J. Jensen Astro-Economics and Market Outlook for Second Quarter of 1945. As published in Llewellyn George's Astrological Bulletin of E38 and 246 in the spring quarter of April to May, June 1945 on pages 38, 39 and 82. One of the more elementary philosophical excursions is the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. Most discussions of the question invariably end in a draw. Both sides of the issue are parallel. However, when we reframe the question and ask which comes first in power, man's freedom of will or his reaction to cosmic stimuli, planetary vibrations and electromagnetic radiation, then the storm breaks loose. Based on some authority, usually political, ecclesiastical or merely a passing shibboleth, apparent evidence is piled up to assure us that man is a completely free entity. That each person may possess traits and reactions which are more or less different from anyone else. Or that his life exhibits definite cyclical shifts, are casually labeled as signs of leaky valves controlling the juices of his glands or some possible hereditary throwback contained within his chemical combination. If such a line of commentary is urged further, the inexplicable of the dead end usually is eased off as beyond the comprehension of man to the realm of God. It is usually very awesome to drag God into a philosophical excursion, and often it affords a very dignified retreat for an impossible and dogmatic position. The facts are that no one has ever defined the term God to general satisfaction. Throughout the entire world, every nation, tribe and clan recognizes a power greater than man who in some manner is worshipped and revered in love or in fear, or both, as God. It is an intangible power greater than man. Our Western culture has built up the science of theology to a system which defines man's relations to God and the existence, nature, and attributes of God in a Trinitarian concept of Father, Son, and Spirit. Until the European politico-economic revolt, which found its expression in the German Reformation under Luther, the Swiss Reformation under Zwingli, the French Reformation under Calvin, and the English Reformation under Cromwell, this theological system nurtured theocracy with its divine right of kings and concept that a state was governed by the immediate direction of God. Concepts were definitely established as to the person of God. But after the stimulation of the Renaissance, science made far-reaching discoveries which broke down many of these old established theological concepts. With the progress, and formidable results, of science, definitions of God became less and less personal and more pantheistic. The view that the universe in its totality is God, that natural laws of the universe are God, and that man is of the universe and subject to all of its physical and spiritual, intellectual, intangible, etc., laws. This upsetting and exceedingly revolutionary impact of science to those tenets laid down by the Council of Nicaea, which had held full sway in the Western world for almost 15 centuries, was devastating. Whenever they had been disputed, all opposition, either by treaty or the sword, had been crushed. Even the Reformation reiterated the Nicene Agreement and used it as its principal foundation. But this time, after the European revolts of the 1870s and the migrations launched by them, and the commercial discoveries of electricity and aircraft which began in the 1880s, scientific developments in the sphere of the unseen forces of the universe aroused intense theological castigation of pantheistic concepts and even more fervent persistence in the Nicene formula of theology. The persistence continues today. Decades ago it was established that education is the systematic training of the moral and intellectual faculties. Due to several complex intrusions, however, in the past several decades education has been less and less the training of faculties but the stuffing of the rules of what majority opinion or authority presents as their version of the facts. Not to think, but to know all the accepted rules and believe them, has been the goal of modern education. In other words, each one quotes and depends on that authority to which he has been exposed, and it forms the beginning and end of his world. It is persistently repeated that most individuals should hold on tightly to the mental and intellectual moorings of the past. That research in the world of ideas, examination of new fields, discoveries and subjects to be avoided. This is good advice for those who dream of finding magic carpets, who hold illusions of grandeur, or who are obsessed with the idea they can dodge the law of karma, compensation. But it is petrifying to the sincere seeker of truth. At least the attitude each one owes himself as a readiness to seek for himself and by himself the heretofore, to him, hidden factors operating in universal law. It is the road to know thyself. This demoralization in conceptual foundations of the past half a century has been apparent in the trends of modern thought, and it has been particularly obvious in the political and economic labyrinths of the last 3 decades. To further complicate what has approached an impasse in any hope of unanimity of concepts are the economic changes in recent years. For example, in 1900 the United States population was about 76 million compared to about 137 million now. With a national income of $19 billion in 1900 and about $147 billion this year, there were $8.5 billion of life insurance policies in force in 1900 compared to about $139 billion in force today, with comparable differences in a multitude of other economic phases. The magnitude of expansion and changes are virtually in direct proportion to the dissolution of conceptual unanimity. It is apparent that a revolution of unprecedented proportions has been underway for several decades in society. Students of natural law long have recognized that from the late 1800s to about the 1950s marks a transition zone between 2 great ages of mankind. From the Piscean Age to the Aquarian Age. Also anticipated have been great wars, revolutionary processes, and all the devastating forces which contribute to tearing down the old in preparation for the new. It would seem that the events of the world between 1914 and 1945 would be sufficient to guarantee the attainment of stability by society and bring the realization of an era of post-war prosperity immediately, instead of waiting another 8 or 10 years. Yet there is nothing in the perspective of the scheme of things to justify the attainment of lasting foundations for the new age in this decade. The second quarter of this year points to a wave of economic optimism which should be strong enough to carry into the third quarter, but major depression implications are very strong after early September of this year, extending to 1947 and 1948. In the second quarter some very optimistic conditions are expected in early April with cooling of enthusiasm after the 15th to the 23rd, some bullish revival from April 23 to May 8 with uncertainty to the 17th followed by slightly increasing pessimism until mid-June. From the area of June 9 to 16 into early July optimism catches hold with prospects of a broad upward surge, but July 1 to 5 can mark a very important top for some time to come.